Tip number 1 is the image on a night of good seeing. Seeing can really help in terms of like details and how much resolution you can get out of the final image. So the better seeing you have, the more you'll be able to zoom in because more light is available. That's actually good light, so you can actually zoom in more, and on top of that, get more good details that won't be visible in a poor seeing condition. Tip number 2, get your collimation to as close as perfect as possible. Collimation is very crucial in planetary imaging, especially because we use SCTs, Cassegrain Grain telescopes. So definitely make sure your collimation is top notch. Without good collimation, you'll still, even regardless if you have good seeing or not, you'll get blurry images, all sorts of stuff you don't want to deal with. A lot of edge-rin artifact especially comes with bad collimation, so do not have bad collimation unless you want edge-rin artifact and you want to cancel it out in processing. Tip number 3 is focus. Make sure to spend a lot of time focusing your planets. If you don't focus the planet correctly, even if it's just a hair off, it's going to look terrible. You're going to see blurring and everything. Tip number 4, get a Crayford focuser. A Crayford focuser can really help tune the fine focus of your image. So make sure if you have a Crayford focuser that you spend a lot of time focusing still, but it will really help in terms of like focusing and making sure your focus is really accurate. Tip number 5 is use a dedicated astronomy camera, like one like the ZWO678MC. That one is really good because a dedicated astronomy camera like that can actually crop in really small on the planets, and also you can use it with a computer and crop it in ROI. And that is my next tip for tip number 6, is to crop it in ROI. ROI means region of interest, and ROI is basically when you crop in really small into the planet Jupiter or whatever planet you're photographing, and you're basically cropping in so that way you get more frames per second, and also it's less harsh on processing. Tip number 7 is to take advantage of lucky imaging. This basically means you're taking the best frames out of your video that you recorded of the planet, and you're stacking the like 20%, 30%, 15% together and making a final result and then sharpening it. Tip number 8 is to use a program like WinJupos. This will derotate the planet, especially for Jupiter and Mars. This basically means you're taking lots of data, and then you'll take it over time and then derotate the planet. It also gives a nice, sharper, smoother result to all the edges of the planet. Tip number 9 is to spend a lot of time outside photographing. The more you take of the planets, the more lucky imaging you'll have, meaning the more frames you have to select from, and better quality ones likely. And also, if you take more frames, you'll be able to get a less noisy result and a sharper result, hopefully, with the better frames you took. Tip number 10 is to get an IR filter. Now, an IR filter is not really that expensive, so it wouldn't be too much. An IR filter can really help with bad seeing, like if you can't have very good nights of seeing. An IR filter can really help with getting the better wavelengths of light where the seeing is actually good, even if the seeing is really bad out that night. Tip number 11 is to use FireCapture for planetary imaging. The main reason why I say this is because they have a really cool feature that is called Auto Align, and the Auto Align basically allows you to center the planet in frames so you don't have to put it through something like PIP, but after you get an imaging, because it makes it really easy. Tip number 12 is to get a large aperture telescope. You can get something like the C11, C8. A C8 is a great starting point, but a C11 tend to be the sweet spot because a C11 is still portable while you can still get great images of the planets. Well, I don't have a C11 right now, but I have a C8, and it still got me this amazing image of Jupiter. So technically, a large aperture can really help with the planetary details and more resolution. Tip number 13 is do not overpower your combination of telescope and camera. Meaning, like, don't put a Barlow lens on there and over zoom it unless the seeing's really good, because it'll just make it all blurry, and you also won't get an amazing image, and you'll still have to really make it really small. And it won't look as good as even if you didn't use a Barlow, and it's going to look worse actually than it would with the undersampling. Tip number 14 is to use lower exposure and higher gain. Now, the reason why you want to use lower exposure, I found out now, is because lower exposure will really help you up that FPS, and also if you use too high of an exposure, even if you get high FPS, it can actually really smear out your images, because the higher exposure you have, the less quality frames you're going to get, because you're going to get some of the bad seeing frames mixed with the good seeing frames in one frame, if that makes sense, and it's not going to look the best. Tip number 15 is to use a program like RegiStax to process your images. RegiStax is a great program because it allows you to sharpen things just right, and it allows you to kind of get the extra details that you might not get in something like Photoshop or PixInsight just doing a simple sharpening unsharp mask. But tip number 16 is actually use AutoStackkert for stacking, because AutoStackkert actually has a lot more options individually for stacking, whereas RegiStax, I found to have some more artifacts and problems when I go to stack. Tip number 17 is use a monochrome camera. A monochrome camera can really help in terms of extra resolution and detail if you don't have a huge telescope. So that's why I recommend using a monochrome camera if you don't have a huge telescope. It can help you get greater details and more details just because it has a higher resolution. Tip number 18 is to use an app like Astrophotography. Astrophotography can really help in terms of seeing. It can tell you what exactly seeing is in your current location and time. It'll really help with like seeing and stuff, and before you actually go outside and try to predict the seeing yourself. Tip number 19, if you need help finding the planets, use something like Stellarium. Stellarium can really help. Oh my gosh, it's raining. Stellarium can really help with that finding the planet issue, because Stellarium will show you exactly the position in the night sky it is. You can kind of scroll around with your phone. It's actually one of the top apps I use for astrophotography. Tip number 20, it is getting really rainy out here. Make sure to use something like Photoshop after the fact, that after you've processed it in RegiStax. It'll really help make sure your images look great. Anyways, until next time, clear skies, I gotta go. Oh!